The Windmill and the Wildflower. It's a curious thing about the northern Kalahari, the way it holds secrets. Not like the ocean, which swallows them whole, or like the mountains, which bury them under stone. No, the Kalahari keeps its secrets in plain sight, scattered across the veld like the bones of long-dead animals, bleached and waiting for someone with the right kind of eyes to read their story. I was reminded of this some years back, sitting at Oom Gert van der Merwe's stoep, watching the sun sink into the earth like a hot coin into sand. Koos Steenkamp was there too, silent as always, safari suit pressed despite the heat, while Oom Gert held forth on the topic of young people and their modern ways. The trouble with the youth today, Oom Gert announced, tapping his pipe against the arm of his chair for emphasis, is that they have no respect for tradition. In my day, Piet, we knew our place. I nodded, though I knew well enough that Oom Gert's memory of his youth improved with each passing year, much like the size of the kudu he claimed to have shot in '62. Koos caught my eye, and the corner of his mouth twitched, as close as he ever came to a smile. Take the Pretorius boy and that school teacher's daughter. Now there was a scandal that would never have happened in my day. And so began the story of Hendrik Pretorius and Marieke van Wyk, a tale I knew well, but never tired of hearing Oom Gert tell, if only for the way he managed to make himself the hero of events, where he was at best a confused bystander. It had been nearly 15 years since the Van Wyks arrived in our small community. Mrs. Van Wyk came to replace old Meneer Venter, who had taught 3 generations of children before his hands grew too gnarled with arthritis to write on the blackboard. She brought with her a daughter, Marieke, a slender girl with eyes the color of rain clouds and a laugh that seemed to startle her, as if she'd never expected such a sound to come from her own throat. They moved into the small house behind the school, and within a week the community had formed its opinions. Mrs. Van Wyk was deemed respectable enough, though with city ways, which meant she wore trousers sometimes and had books that weren't the Bible. Marieke, however, was another matter entirely. That girl, Oom Gert's wife had declared after church that first Sunday, has wildness in her. It wasn't anything you could point to exactly. Marieke was polite, helped her mother, and attended church without complaint. But there was something in the way she looked at things, as if she was seeing not just what was there, but all the things that might have been instead. She wore her dark hair loose when all the other girls wore braids, and she asked questions in Sunday school that made Dominee Fourie clear his throat and suggest they move on to the next verse. She reads poetry, Tannie Pretorius had whispered one day at the general store. In the same tone she might have said, she has the plague. None of this would have mattered much if Elder Pretorius's son hadn't noticed her too. Hendrik Pretorius was the kind of young man the community pointed to with pride. Tall and broad-shouldered from farm work, with a serious face and respectful manner. He was his father's right hand at church and in the fields. He was expected to take over the family farm one day, marry a suitable girl, most likely Elise du Toit, whose father owned the adjacent property, and raise a brood of sturdy, God-fearing children who would continue the cycle. What no one seemed to notice, or perhaps chose not to see, was the way Hendrik's eyes followed the spine of a book, hungry as a starving man at a feast, or how sometimes when his father was deep in conversation about rainfall or cattle prices, Hendrik would stare at the horizon as if wondering what lay beyond it. Their first meeting, as Oom Gert tells it, happened at the annual spring dance. The community hall was decorated with paper streamers and wildflowers, and Tannie Bezuidenhout's ancient gramophone wheezed out tunes from 20 years before. "I saw it all," Oom Gert insisted, though I happened to know he'd spent most of that evening in a heated argument with Fanie Viljoen about the best way to predict rain. The Pretorius boy asked her to dance, very proper, but the way they looked at each other, like two people who'd found water after a long drought. What Oom Gert didn't see, what none of us saw, was the meetings that followed. How Hendrik would finish his chores early to walk the long way past the school. How Marieke would take books to the old trading post ruins to read, only to find Hendrik already there, whittling or simply waiting. They were careful, those two. In a place where everyone watched everyone else, they carved out moments of privacy like artists. She gave him books, Koos interjected quietly, surprising both Oom Gert and me. Koos rarely contributed to these stories. Oom Gert looked annoyed at the interruption, but nodded. Dangerous things, books. Fill a young man's head with ideas that don't belong on a farm. Like what? I asked, curious about what Koos might know that Oom Gert didn't. Wordsworth, Koos said, pronouncing the name carefully. Byron, Shelley. Oom Gert snorted. Never heard of them. Must be communists. Koos's eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement. English poets, actually, from the last century. Same thing, Oom Gert declared, with the confidence of a man who has never let facts interfere with his opinions. I thought of Hendrik as I'd known him, serious-faced, but with eyes that seemed to be looking at something the rest of us couldn't see. And Marieke, who moved through our community like a wildflower that had somehow taken root in a vegetable garden. Not unwelcome exactly, but conspicuously different. Their secret might have remained just that, if not for the incident at the old windmill. The structure had stood abandoned for years, its metal vanes creaking in the wind, too costly to repair, but too sturdy to fall. It had become a place for young couples to meet, far enough from town to offer privacy, but not so far to require an explanation if one was seen heading in that direction. It was Oom Gert who discovered them, though not by design. His old hunting dog had run off, and he tracked it to the windmill, arriving just in time to see Hendrik and Marieke in what he described as a most compromising embrace. The girl wasn't even embarrassed, Oom Gert exclaimed, still indignant years later. Looked me right in the eye, she did, while the Pretorius boy turned red as a sunset. What exactly were they doing? Young Stefan asked, having wandered onto the stoep midway through the story. Stefan had a city boy's fascination with rural scandals, always hoping they might involve something more exciting than they usually did. They were reading poetry together, Oom Gert finished, lamely, suddenly aware of his wife listening from the kitchen window. Poetry? Stefan looked disappointed. Very inappropriate poetry, Oom Gert added hastily. French stuff. Koos made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh, disguised as a cough. What happened next became the subject of much speculation and debate in our community. Oom Gert, despite his fondness for sharing other people's business, claimed he told them he wouldn't say a word if they promised to end their inappropriate friendship. Whether he kept this promise is another matter. I was thinking of the community, Oom Gert insisted, refilling his glass, and the Pretorius boy's future. What kind of farmer would he make with his head full of poetry? Can't milk a cow with a sonnet. I don't know, I said mildly, feeling the warmth of the brandy loosening my tongue. Properly is doing what's expected, Oom Gert said firmly. Properly is respecting tradition. Properly is knowing your place and staying in it. Koos said nothing,
But his eyes met mine again, and I knew we were thinking the same thing, that perhaps what Hendrik and Marieke had done required more courage than either of us had ever shown. What Oom Gert doesn't know, what I have never told him or anyone else in our community, is that I saw them once, nearly 10 years after they disappeared. I was in Johannesburg for a livestock auction, walking through a suburb of neat houses with trimmed lawns, when I spotted them. They were older, of course. Hendrik had grown a beard, and Marieke's wild hair was cut shorter, more practical. They were standing in the garden of a modest house, watching a small boy who was chasing butterflies across the grass. Hendrik had his arm around Marieke, and she was leaning into him, laughing at something he'd said. They looked ordinary, not like characters from a scandal or a romance, not like rebels or fools.
Just a man and woman who had built a life together, far from the judgment of those who thought they knew best. I stood there for a moment, half hidden by a jacaranda tree, watching them. The boy, their son I presumed, had Hendrik's serious brow, but Marieke's quick smile. He was trying to catch butterflies in his cupped hands, releasing each one with a look of wonder when he succeeded. I could have called out to them. I could have walked over and said, "Remember me from back home?" I could have told them how Elder Pretorius had softened in recent years, how he kept a photograph hidden in his Bible, how Mrs. van Wyk sent Christmas cards to the school every year with no return address. But I didn't. I watched them for a moment, their happiness as simple and profound as water in the desert, and then I turned and walked away. Some secrets, I decided, the Kalahari should be allowed to keep. "More brandy, Piet?" Oom Gert asked, interrupting my thoughts. I nodded, holding out my glass, and let him continue his story, which had somehow become one about the time he single-handedly saved the community from a swarm of locusts. Koos caught my eye again, and this time I was the one who almost smiled. "You know," Oom Gert said, warming to his new topic, "those locusts were as big as sparrows, stripped Fanie Viljoen's maize field bare in under an hour." "Remarkable," I murmured, thinking not of locusts, but of Hendrik and Marieke, who had found the courage to leave everything familiar for the sake of an uncertain future together. "It was my quick thinking that saved us," Oom Gert continued. "I told everyone to bang pots and pans together, make as much noise as possible. Locusts hate noise." "Do they?" Stefan asked, genuinely curious. "Of course they do," Oom Gert said with authority. "Everyone knows that." Koos raised an eyebrow slightly, but said nothing. The sun had almost disappeared now, leaving just a thin line of gold along the horizon. In the gathering darkness, the veld stretched out before us, vast and mysterious, full of stories that would never be told and secrets that would never be revealed. The Kalahari keeps its secrets in plain sight, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, it shows you just enough truth to make you question everything you thought you knew. As the stars began to appear, bright and sharp in a clear night sky, I thought about Hendrik and Marieke's boy chasing butterflies in a Johannesburg garden. I wondered what stories they told him about where they came from. I wondered if someday he might feel the pull of the Kalahari in his blood, a connection to a place he'd never known. And I wondered if when that day came, he would find his way back here to discover the other half of his story, the half his parents left behind when they chose each other over everything else. "Another round?" Oom Gert asked, holding up the nearly empty bottle. "Why not?" I said, and held out my glass once more.